Tonight, in a move that has everyone buzzing, the president is reportedly planning a major cabinet shakeup. This potential reshuffle comes at a critical time, with key issues like the economy, national security, and healthcare front and center. The question on everyone's mind is, what changes will be made and how will they impact the administration's ability to tackle these challenges? Cabinet reshuffles can signal a shift in priorities or an attempt to refresh leadership as the president looks to strengthen positions moving forward. We'll have a panel of experts and analysts piece out what exactly we're dealing with, as new faces and fresh dynamics may soon reshape the future of this government. We'll also touch on a few other burning issues. I'm Constance Ikechukwu, and this is Arise Prime Time. Welcome to the program. President Bola Tinubu is set to reshuffle his cabinet, triggering a wave of speculation and lobbying by ministers. The shakeup comes amidst mounting pressure on the president to align his administration with the promises of his renewed hope agenda. He's been expected to do more to address pressing national issues, including the economy and security matters. Ministers are said to be bracing themselves for what could be a sweeping overhaul in the executive arm of government. What are the implications of this shakeup, and what does it mean for governance? Will a reorganization of the cabinet produce the desired results? Joining me in this discussion are our esteemed panelists, Professor Okey Ikechukwu, philosopher, executive director of Development Specs Academy, and a professor of human capital development. He's also a member of the THISDAY newspaper editorial board. We also have Professor Ibrahim, senior fellow at the Center for Democracy and Development. And in our offsite studio, we have Professor Adeniyi. He's a professor of communications at Bayes University here in Abuja. Gentlemen or professors, thank you for joining us. I'm surrounded by professors this evening. I feel dwarfed, Professor Okey Ikechukwu and the rest of you, but thank you for joining us. Thank you for making the time. So let me start with Professor Okey Ikechukwu. Let's look at the state of the nation today. What's your quick take on all that is happening?
Well, the nation is clearly in bad shape. And for this, there are several factors, most of which cannot be pinned down exclusively on the government of the day. What we are witnessing is the accumulation of so many things that have taken time to build up. But it's also true they've worsened in recent times. Security, particularly cost of living, among other things. So there is nothing new actually anybody can tell us. We are seeing it ourselves. It's affecting our pocket. It's affecting the level of living. It's affecting the level of social comfort. It is within the context of all of this that Nigerians are asking themselves, when will the president rejig his cabinet? That concern is accentuated by the fact that, quite frankly, between us, I don't know, maybe Professor Adeniyi and my colleague here, maybe they may be better than myself, but quite frankly, you can't really remember the names of more than 5 ministers. They don't talk, nobody knows what they are doing, among other things. So if you're talking about cabinet reshuffle, yes, it's about time. But let it also not just be for the sake of it.
Right.
Time to look for more competent people, time for better reporting, time for clearing measurable impact, but above all, time to deal with the crisis of poverty and suffering in the land.
Okay, let's go to Professor Adeniyi in our offsite studio. From what you've seen so far in the year of this administration, do you believe that the government can be considered a serious-minded one with a clear vision for the country to do public good? Where do you think their anchor lies? How would you rate the government in general?
That's a very tricky one, but in any case, we know how the government came into power. You know, we know that it came on the back of a problematic 8 years prior to their coming. There were quite a number of things that they inherited around the economy, particularly, and it was obviously going to be tough, you know, to start from what they inherited. And of course, in trying to pull up, from where they took over, government, ran into some murky waters, some of them self-created, particularly with the way that the government removed subsidy on oil. The subsidy is gone statement is still haunting us, without necessarily it was removed, in a rather drastic manner without some necessary cushion. The cushion are probably coming long after the pains had become very, very preponderant. So it's been tough. We've been going through a kind of gamble, and of course we're still trying to navigate our way out of it, if at all we have made any achievement in that regard. But again, coming to the question of cabinet reshuffle, it can be very important to say that sometimes when government say they want to reshuffle cabinet, it could be one of two things. Maybe because there have been pressures from political circles, from people who want to succeed, those who are in power, further to, feathering their own nest, because most of the time when people are in position in this government is largely to self-help. We want to hope that this time around it's not driven by the pressure tactics of politicians who think that it is time that they also take their turn. But if it is weaved around performance, saying that with respect to energizing the government so that we can have more performance, then we can say, hallelujah, the government is therefore moving in the right direction. And if they do that, I can answer your question in the affirmative, in the opposite, that, they are now serious-minded, they are now performance-driven, and of course, they are committed to leaving a good legacy after 4 years, so to say. But if it is otherwise, then of course, we have to continue to say again that we are just, recycling what we know the system is like, which is that it may not be so much of individuals, manning different sectors of the economy, but a problem with the system, really, because if the system is still problematic, you can change individuals many times over, the problem will still remain the same thing. And of course, what this tells us is that we need to be more conscientious in leadership, we need to be much more serious-minded, thinking away from self-aggrandizement, and of course, to be much more people-centric. Otherwise, we'll just be moving in circles, and of course, governance will be more like a circus rather than development-driven, as the case could be, Constance.
Okay, Professor Ibrahim, let me come to you. I'll ask you a similar question of, so far looking at the country, what do you think about how this government has managed Nigeria up to date?
I think it's important to reflect a bit about the philosophy behind the appointment of the current government, which was essentially twofold. First, compensate those who've played a critical role in bringing President Tinubu to power. Secondly, use those same powerful elements to ensure he stays in power and gets re-elected in 2027. That was the basis on which, that was the criteria that were used in selecting members of the government. So performance was never at the forefront of the thinking of government. But then, the performance of this government has been so catastrophic that for all citizens, the issue is we've never had a government where, under whose tutelage, suffering, misery, hunger have reached these heights. So the citizens are showing the president now that, well, fine, you chose your friends who help you to power, but your friends who help you to power are punishing us, are creating terrible conditions that's messing up our lives, and therefore it is our turn now to show our anger and to show that you are not guaranteed to continue in power if this is your vision of government. So this is the general context in which the current reflection is occurring, and clearly President Tinubu is realizing, well, the political choice and the political philosophy he used may make sense to the politician that he is, but for any politician, threat to remaining in power is the most serious threat. And therefore, this is what's imposing on the government the necessity to rethink how to assure a better future, not for Nigerians, but for those who hold government.
Okay, Professor Ikechukwu, let's build on what Professor Ibrahim has just said. We look at the government, we've heard today that there is an impending cabinet reshuffle. What areas would you like to see changes when that reshuffle is happening? What particular sectors or specific areas do you think need urgent attention at the moment?
Please, before I get on that, I believe we should stop pretending that when we speak of government, we are talking only of the federal government. There are subnational governments, state governments, local government, councillors, council chairmen, and ward chairmen. Question, what is it they really do? To what extent is the security crisis in the country partly traceable to the subnational government? So in doing all of this in this 1 year, let's also spread it a little. So I'd like us to note that fact before going on to the matter of where areas should be. The question I would ask is, where really should we not ask for change? We're living in this country. In which sector have we seen such a dramatic performance that we would say, oh, well, it's in this place and not that place? And let us look at the framework. You employed ministers, you appointed ministers. In a presidential system, ministers are like your personal aides because you actually are the government. You appointed ministers, no problem about that. You appointed a coordinating minister, no problem about that. Then you went ahead to create, I think, a monitoring and evaluation unit subsequently. What have all these delivered? What is the level of coordination? It has its political implications. I can understand that happening under Obasanjo, but when all of us are appointed ministers and Professor Jibrin is to be a coordinating minister, we are reporting to him whether we like it or not. Now, that reportage, have we seen any result? Is there really a clear picture of coherence and focus? Not sufficient. So if you're beginning to talk about pick and choose who to remove or who not to remove, my question will be, where will you start from? I started by saying that, quite frankly, one can't easily recollect the names of more than maybe 4, 5, or 6 ministers. And when we were growing up, these were things for which you're required to write exams. Oh, name so and so ministers. So I wouldn't know what to choose and pick from, but certainly there are some key ministers who are making, if you like, in their own chosen field, some good impression. But to now say it has to be this one and that, if you, for instance, you ask me about, let's suppose you had, I'm thinking there was this talk about building more dams. Did you hear environment involved in that conversation? Agriculture can build more dams to get more food. But as you build dams, you cut off local economies that need that water. Environment, water resources, Nigerian inland waterways, all of them. So the problem of cohesion in policy making is what has to be addressed. That if we are talking about education, for instance, the stakeholders in education are just parents, not just teachers. The concept of stakeholder engagement is something that has now been transported to reside in government. If there's something you want to do and you call up your friends, let's suppose you're about to take a decision, you call for a public hearing at the National Assembly. We celebrate it. The public hearing ought to begin in the constituencies. You finish with your people, it keeps graduating until it comes here. So we've created, if you like, a delusional superstructure on the basis of which we think we are governing Nigerians. That is one of the things one would like to see reversed.
Right.
That's why the question of appointment of ministers has to go beyond political patronage, popularity, elections. Because even on the day Tinubu was sworn in, I was on this your station. I said the only thing that can make him a superstar is that if he appoints the right people and performs so well that everybody will say, leave this man alone. Now, that's what we have difficulty saying, and that's a problem. Right.
Professor Adeniyi, let me bring you in here. Professor Ikechukwu had just said, Ikechukwu had talked about political patronage. This has been a discussion for the better part of this administration. The president is someone that is known to, fall back on loyalty or expect loyalty within his cabinet, and so he has most times picked people that he has worked with, mostly from Lagos State. So concerning the cabinet reshuffle that we are expecting, do you think the president will go beyond that to focus on expertise and to focus on competence and character in order to have a better performance for the better part of his administration?
Well, Constance, you asked if I think. I think if I want to give you a straightforward answer, I would just say I don't think, because President Bola Ahmed Tinubu is somebody you can regard as a core politician. And of course, when politicians do their calculations, rightly or wrongly, they are looking at the next election. And in looking at the next election, they are looking at, how well they can put the pieces necessary. They can put all the right pieces in the right jigsaw so that they can win that election. Against that background, you will expect that it's not going to deviate largely, from political consideration. And if you look at the history of our country, reflected again in his administration, one of our bane has been the politics of compensation, reward, politics of reward, and politics of loyalty, at the expense of merit, at the expense of expertise, But of course, the prayer that we can just put across is for the president this time around, to privilege merit, to privilege performance and productivity over political consideration, even though we acknowledge the fact that he is a politician, and of course, he will want to continue to do well in that process. If he's going to reshuffle a third of his cabinet, of his nearly 50-member cabinet, we'll be expecting that a slight injection of people, the people we often call technocrats, can make the required change. And if you remember the last few administrations we've had, just 1, 2, or 3 technocrats, actually made the changes that ended up portraying those administrations as excellent. You introduced me earlier by my trade. I am a student of communication, and I know one of the easiest way to communicate really, or to send a message around an object, is if you are communicating facts, because in doing so, your conscience will also be free. Your conscience, I beg your pardon, will feel liberated. And what am I trying to say? I'm just simply saying that, no matter how well you want to market or portray a good product in good light, if that product is tainted, the populace, the audience will always see through things and know that you are definitely telling a lie. And of course, your conscience will also continue to pepper you. But of course, if you are communicating fact, funded on performance, funded on empirical delivery, like we expect every government to do, and like we're expecting President Bola Ahmed Tinubu to do in the next few years of his first term, of course, it will become much easier for them to communicate properly. And to put it in another way, of course, in the last couple of months, we have seen so many things, that negates, the philosophy of good optics, things that are counter-symbolic. The symbolism has been very, very poor because government simply think, that it can continue as if it's still business as usual, without necessarily thinking that they can be more creative, more innovative, changing patterns and particularities away from the old order. But we do know again that they need courage to do this, but there's nothing stopping the president of a country, a powerful country like Nigeria, from mustering that courage, and of course, initiating or bringing about the much needed change that we ordinarily anticipate, considering how well we're made to believe that he prepared for this position. And of course, we keep making the point that it is not late in the day. If actually he's going to change his cabinet, like we've been told, maybe injecting a few people that we know that the world can easily acknowledge, as experts, who are magisterial in their fields, then of course we will not be in doubt that it's set to make changes, to the tepid kind of performance we have witnessed in the last 1 year and a half, even though we know some of them have actually put in their best thus far.
Okay, talking about courage, Professor Ibrahim, it does take courage to do the right thing. Let's look at some of the reports this morning. When you look at the Guardian newspaper today, it talked about at least 11 ministers to be dropped. And there are a couple of names here that I would like to read out. Some of them are the Minister of Budget and Economic Planning, Atiku Bagudu. There's Minister of Industry, Trade and Investment, Doris Uzoka Anite. Minister of Interior, Olubumi Tunji Ojo. There's Minister of Communication, Innovation and Digital Economy. And of course, there's also the Chief of Staff, Femi Gbajamiela, who we're being told has been personed down to be dropped. When you look at all these names, Nigerians have also had the discussion. Is it about the size of the cabinet? Should the size be reduced, or will it be just about the quality of the cabinet? Where are you leaning towards, Professor Ibrahim?
You know, if you want a minister to be preserved, to be left on his seat, spread rumor that that minister will be removed, then of course the president will say, these people, why are they forcing me to remove this minister? Okay, I will remove him. So don't be surprised if it is the friends of these ministers who are spreading those names to push the president in a separate direction. I'm not going to go into the politics of names. I will not name names, and I think that's really not the issue. The issues we have made that are profound are that the general performance of most of these ministers is abysmally low, is totally unacceptable, and the president, for his own survival, needs to bring up a new team that has competence, that has capacity, and that can deliver on the agenda of the president. One of the ironies of this cabinet is that we've never had such a large cabinet, and in spite of the huge size of the cabinet, their performance is the lowest we have seen in decades. And therefore, the whole problem is that in choosing this cabinet, thoughts have not been focused on performance and ability to deliver. And that's what needs to change. I think there's a sense in which the president has to come to terms with the fact that if he wants to leave a legacy of his government, then he should go back to the Tinubu of old. The Tinubu of old, the younger man who ruled Lagos, spent a lot of time and energy in choosing people who can deliver. And he did that. He identified them. So we all know he has this capacity. I don't know what the problem now is, whether it's tiredness, whether it's age, or whether it's the fact that he has reached his ultimate goal. He's no longer thinking like the young governor of Lagos State was 24 years ago. And I think maybe he should take a moment of reflection to go back and ask himself, when we came into power in 1999, what was the thought process I used? What were the skills that I looked for? And how did I go about identifying people who can deliver? Then do a refresher course he himself will give himself, because he's done it in the past, so we know he knows how to do it. Then question himself and say, Mike, how come I can no longer do what I used to be able to do? Then after he has criticized himself, told himself off, maybe he'll be able to sit up and say, okay, I'm going back to the old Tinubu, and I will show you I can still do it. That's the way to think about it.
Right. Professor Ikechukwu, Professor Ibrahim talks about the Tinubu of old. Moving forward, is this about age, though, or what do you think has happened to the president?
I'm not sure anything has happened to the president. Abuja is not Lagos. The Federal Republic of Nigeria is not Lagos. The number of stakeholders are much more in number. The issues are much more complicated. Lagos is spatially homogeneous. It is to his credit he held Lagos together. It's an environment in which he grew up and he knew well. The menace of area boys in Lagos was at its peak. Then he became governor, he found use for them. So it was a response to an environment he knew, with people who also knew that environment and who could take the risks, who knew who to call, and there would be no more trouble. Now, the question would be, did he have that kind of grip on Nigeria? He had the political grip, but if in Lagos you had 28 stakeholders identified and 3 on the ground, in Nigeria you have 150,000 stakeholders and 300 unidentified. And those interests are supposed to come to his table. He's no magician. So if you even look at some of the things he does, it shows that he's still the, what you like, if you like, strategic. He does what he used to, but the problems are different. The problems are much bigger. The consequences are wider, reporting lines. Okay, Lagos, you have a number of people reporting to you, and you've held sway in that context. Today you have 50 ministers, all of them are supposed to report to you. You have senior special assistants for every ministry. That's another 50. Then you have special assistants, and plethora, assuming they're all even writing reports, who will read them? So you find that also feedback becomes some form of challenge, and at the end of the day, you tend to coast. And like Professor Ibrahim mentioned about those working with him, yes, he came with the team, very competent team, in fairness to them, for all they did in Lagos. Well, look at this new context. Here you are, with your exposure of a certain type, limited to a certain context, meeting new issues you're not quite sure how to deal with, and then you're receiving inputs that should go to the president for decision making. All of that, the presidency is warehousing a totally new reality, and that is part of the crisis on the table. Now, yes, initially you just won the election, so what is there? Make people happy. That's the usual demand when elections are won. People want compensation. They want to be compensated. You bring them in, give them some time, look for people who can really do the job. If Tinubu could find the people who could do the job in Lagos and found a fantastic successor who even did better, it means that the capacity is not missing. What you have on the table today is not Alimosho people and Badagry people and Lagos Island. You have people today who don't want Tinubu to remain president. Now, that's apart from the political opposition. You have the intra-party crisis with a regional slant. You've had the kind of pronouncements being made by regional organizations, whether you call it, at a point, I think Katsina Elders came out to say to take a position on the relocation of departments of CBN. Katsina Elders, they are not taking a position on banditry in their state and the kidnap of an emir in that state. So this is a totally asymmetrical environment, and nobody is a magician.
Right.
Why it is important that he should bring it under control are 3 reasons. Number 1, he said, Ebilokon, it's my turn. That your turn should not be one that will disgrace you. The second thing is that much of what the opposition is saying, some of it makes sense. He should do what he used to do in Lagos, which is tactical engagement by negotiation. Find out what the problem is. Put it on the table. Thirdly, and most importantly, no amount of speech making can remove hunger.
Right.
And that is one major crisis, that plain, naked, desperate inability to find food takes logic off the table, takes patriotism off the table, takes even the concept of citizenship off the table. And there are 2 points to make.
Okay.
Is it true that there was a governor who sold all the entire palliatives sent to his people? Is it true there's a governor who sold off fertilizer meant for farmers in Cameroon? If these facts are there, my question is, why is the presidency and the federal government being lousy? Why are you taking rubbish for what you should enable Nigeria? If you're doing anything, let's know. Let's know where the sabotage is coming from. Why are you concealing things like this when we know it for fact? Those are some of the things he should think about and now say, listen, I need a performing team. Guys, you've had your run.
Right. Professor Adeniyi, Professor Ikechukwu has just expounded on what we're dealing with here. It shows that it's not easy to be the president of Nigeria. It also shows that we need to choose carefully in order to get the person that can do this very tasking job. How do we get that going in Nigeria? Because politically now we haven't solved our problems. How do we get a president that can run Nigeria?
Well, I think the only legitimate constitutional way to get a president is through the ballot box. We have one now that emerged through that process, and no matter how controversial it was, it likely depends on the people, how rigorous, how critically minded, how conscious the people are at every particular point in time. And of course, it also takes us back to the question of strengthening our electoral process. How well are we managing the electioneering process, Is it one that is riddled with violence? Is it one that is transactional? Is it one where votes are commodified, Is it one where people vote in accordance with their conscience, or where their consciences are being soiled, Is it natural, Is it organic or inorganic? Those are the questions that we'll continue to ask. And of course, it's a continuing conversation, no doubt, consistent with the regular argument that we make that, the entire process of nation building is work in progress. And democracy as a pattern of government, is also a work in progress. And that's why we keep saying that it's a journey and not necessarily a destination. So the conversation continues, but of course, we also want to make the point that a very charismatic leadership, can either emerge in two ways. One, through happenstance. One that will be very, very courageous, we would not know, the populace may not know, the electorates may not know. He will just step on there and go for broke, making the drastic decisions, in the determination to bring about change. Then the other way is through a painstaking effort, through the rigorous electioneering process, rigorous assessment, like we see it happens, like it's presently happening in the United States of America, where we are savoring the rigorous electioneering process, where they are separating the wheat from the chaff, where candidates are tested on the basis of their opinion on issues, allowing the populace to be able to anticipate how well their policy directions will be by the time they get into power. Well, that's a sophisticated democracy, and that's a sophisticated environment where we hope to get to someday. But in our own case, I think we'll just continue to try, hoping that we'll strike that chord, and that we'll make that chord at the appropriate time. But in the circumstance, we have, Constance, just a moment, in the circumstance, we have a leader in our hands, it's a fait accompli, there's nothing we can do other than to continue to put his feet to fire, not just himself, but also his lieutenants as well, because yes, he's a leader, he's a president, but we have other sub-leaders, people around him who are also significant in terms of charting policy direction relevant for the stability and sustainability of the society. We do not have any option other than calling on them until we get to our required destination, if at all. Constance.
You're watching Arise Prime Time. Plenty more still ahead. Stay with us. Welcome back to Arise Prime Time, when we offer perspectives on news and talking points of the day. I'm Constance Ikechukwu. I still have our analysts with me in the studio, Professor Okey Ikechukwu. We also have Professor Ibrahim and Professor Adeniyi in the off-site studio. Welcome again once more. Let's turn our attention to other issues today in the country. I would like to start with you, Professor Ibrahim. Let's talk about corruption in the country and the fight against corruption. I'm sure you followed the cat and mouse case between former governor of Kogi State, Yahaya Bello, and the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission. They've slammed fresh charges against him, and it's been difficult to get him to appear in court. What do you think that does for the fight against fraud and misbehavior by public officers? What does that do?
I think it's one of the most worrying aspects of the current regime. They have not shown any will or capacity to confront corruption up front, because throughout this period, they know where he has been, and where he has been is secured by elements working for the Nigerian security services, and that therefore he cannot have remained all these weeks and months beyond their capacity to bring to justice. And it just shows you that the philosophy maybe of this regime is that when our own members are involved in deep corruption, let's just turn the other way. Let's pretend we are not seeing them, or let's pretend we are trying to catch them, but they are a bit elusive, therefore there isn't anything we can do. Very early in this government, the Minister of Humanitarian Affairs was caught, according to government sources, deeply involved in corruption. Government came out and said we will deal with the situation immediately. She was suspended, and action was to follow swiftly. We have not seen that action. The whole issue has been put on the sidelines, and this type of messaging really defines the character of the regime. That as long as you are a faithful member of this regime, or a loyal member as they put it, and you get caught in corruption, you are not going to suffer consequences. That's really the message. And it's that message that's really annoying Nigeria, in addition to the fact that all of us have made, that people are really very hungry at this point in time and are in deep misery. Why is it that a government that promised to turn a new leaf and to confront the evil of corruption in power will not do what it can do, and yet they will be given narratives about their commitment to fighting corruption? And I think the recent story about Bobrisky is really very indicative about how deep the rot is in our society, where you can pay an amount and charges against you would be withdrawn, or where you can be sent to jail on paper and you pay another amount and you'll be given a very nice, comfortable flat to stay in, and you won't even go into the prison. It makes a mockery of the whole justice system. And those who administer this type of justice system and those in charge of political authority in this country are doing the country and themselves a terrible disservice by showing to the worst elements in society, the most corrupt, the most crooked, that you can continue along your ways and there will be no negative consequences for you. Right. It is very sad, it is terrible, and it is what will finally nail the coffin on this regime.
Professor Ikechukwu, when you look at the government, do you think it has the capacity to clean up Nigeria? And since Professor Ibrahim also mentioned the judicial system, we have a new Chief Justice of Nigeria. But do you expect does she also have the capacity, or will she be hamstrung to do the right thing?
To have the capacity of as an individual is one thing. To have an enabling system and environment is another. And I'm glad you mentioned the case of Bobrisky. Put yourself in the position of the EFCC chairman today. Clearly, that entire controversy, some people will certainly say, oh, let him resign. We forget that the underlayer of any executive position are the support services. And that the corruption at that level is much stronger and it gets far less attention. Yes, Bobrisky said she paid 15 million. Will you go to the coffers of EFCC and see it? No. Was it any leadership directive? No. And that's a runaway criminality that has become the basic foundation of what happens in so many places. If Professor Ibrahim here and I are appointed ministers today, and we are not performing, quote and unquote, these are our friends who will come and say, what is wrong with you? You came to our turn and you started loving Nigeria. So that element, that aspect of it is there. But what will make a much more dramatic difference is leadership signaling. You may have all the mischievous aspirations you have, but if you get a clear indication that leadership will not take any of this if you're found out, You'll be very careful. Look at the banditry in Zamfara. It's going on, but we have a record of a bandit leader who was banned. So what does that tell you? So you migrate it to the conversation about corruption. The whole process of governance, monitoring and management has created a crisis that allows a lot of things to go through the cracked wall. That's the crisis on the table. And the general concern is that at the national level, you don't get very clear indications. Like the example cited, humanitarian affairs, even the one before her, among other things. While she was there, all of us were saying it, we said it on this station, that you spent 250-something billion feeding children while COVID was on and they were all in their parents' houses. But having said all of that, it's actually not so easy also to say that nothing is being. Take, for instance, you have a clear allegation, somebody has moved money, a freshly appointed minister, a young minister should have been a source of pride to the youth, and that case came up. To take it to court involves judicial processes that must be watertight before you go to court. So in some cases, what is seen as neglect or non-prosecution is actually part of that process. Where the problem comes from, assuming I'm the one trying to prosecute, I'm the agency, and I give an update, you see the suspicion of foul play will then drop. But the truth on the table, and which is what is emerging in this conversation, is that there is not a very strong indication that you dare not. More of it coming from the National Assembly, actually, than the presidency, where there seems to be a riot of mischief. A senator was suspended. Facts imagine that what he said was true. He was forced to apologize. That's not the first time. Zwingina had that kind of situation, I think, with El-Rufai in the past under Obasanjo. So if you're looking at the reflexes of the National Assembly, and somebody is telling you that anybody is interested in fighting corruption or in alleviating poverty, a National Assembly that put on the budget a car park, I think 36 billion or thereabouts, among so many other things, you find that the entire atmosphere, even if it's not coming from the presidency, even if it's not coming from the national, there's an incubus of, look, they don't want to fight corruption. The counter-narrative needs to come out in the public domain, and that's what's really important.
Right. Professor Adeniyi, let's look at the Nigerian army and the case of Private Ruth, is it Ogunlaya? Let me just get the name. Yes, Ruth Ogunlaya. Yes, Ruth Ogunlaya. She was dismissed after allegations of sexual harassment from her bosses. There was an investigation that was carried out. The investigation was concluded, and the army officials were exonerated. She was now let go from her job. It's caused a lot of uproar, and she's been all about talking about it. She's now asked the army to publish that report. Do you think the Nigerian army has handled this well? Because it's a bit of a scandalous situation, isn't it?
Yeah, very, very scandalous, no doubt, worrisome for a reputable institution like the army. But again, it speaks to what we often see in many systems anyway, and particularly in ours, really, where you see different kinds of harassment going on, particularly against the opposite sex, particularly, especially women. And of course, to find it rearing its ugly head in a respectable institution like the army is very unfortunate. But of course, I read the story, and it's somewhat balanced. The army provided what looks like a balanced outcome from their investigation. And what is left for us now is just to believe what we want to believe and ignore what we want to ignore. But I want to also assume that there should be an end, to the drama. And what the government is trying to do through the army, through the Ministry of Women Affairs, is to find a way to resolve it, And I think what we can now do now eventually is to probably find a way as well to talk to the lady, to let sleeping dogs lie, or rather to just, sheath our swords, so that there can be peace at the end of the day around the subject matter. Because it does appear to me that the army came somewhat magnanimous, providing a soft landing for her, a good pathway against the background of how powerful it can be to prove those kind of allegations, considering how people who have been accused come together, allegedly trying to help themselves so that none of them will be embarrassed, and by extension, the institution will not be embarrassed at the end of the day. But I think to some extent the army deserves commendation, for feeding us with information, giving us an outcome that appear balanced, Right. But I'm just going to appeal, if I can, to the lady, to just let sleeping dogs lie, considering the intervention of the Ministry of Women Affairs. She has been allowed to go. She should just hope for better days ahead and move on with her life. Constance.
Professor Jibrin, do you agree that the army has handled this well and, has been magnanimous?
What we know is that institutions such as the army have a long tradition of resisting any questioning from within it. It's a very authoritarian institution where the fact that you are the boss means you can do what you want and get away with it. I think there is a problem with that culture still in the army, and the army should look at that culture and try to temper it now that we are in a democratic environment. There is the fact of the matter, which is that the proof is always difficult to establish in a case such as this. But because we don't have the proof of what actually happened, I'm not going to take sides, but I will question the fact that the institutions like the army have too much of an authoritarian culture, and they are opening up and softening up to human rights concerns, and of course to the rights of their own members is very important. How many times have, for example, soldiers complained that they have not received their allowances, they have not received their food rations, and no officer has ever been punished for such outcomes? So it's a deeper problem within the institution, and I think the leadership of that institution should think through what's the best way forward.
Right. We're almost out of time, so I'll say, Professor Ikechukwu, briefly, what's your last word on what we've discussed so far, or on the state of the nation?
Not all the facts are always on the table pertaining to the harassment thing. And part of the challenge, if you remember the Banex incident, involved the military.
Yes.
Some boys who went there, they were not sent by any superior officer. That incident was taken very seriously. Those guys were dealt with, but it's not in the public domain. So the disciplinary action the army has taken, the public doesn't know about it, and they walk away with the impression that, oh, they support it. Now on this matter of the private, there are also issues to consider. Could she have fabricated it against 3 officers? What really happened? She's going on social media and saying, okay, if they publish it and it's also countered. So it's something that shouldn't have been developed to this point. And I know that within the army, there are very strict rules about association, they use the word fraternizing. If a junior if a subordinate is put under pressure sexually or even excessively socially by a superior officer, the person to be dealt with is a superior officer, because if you allow him and he goes on, that cankerworm, he will carry it throughout his years of service. So what I will say on this is I don't have the facts. And looking at the release, he's saying publish the results. I don't know of any other claim she's making. There's those who made, so I'm reluctant to take a position one way or another. It just doesn't sound like this thing. But on the issues on the table, October 1 will be here in a few days. We expect the president will make some very strong landmark announcements on policy issues around 3 things. Let him rejig those he's working with. And in rejigging them, let him retain those. For instance, if you've paid attention, if we're paying attention, we are not, the information minister has been doing well. We are not suffering the misfortune that we had to suffer for 8 years in the past.
Okay.
So get competent people, rejig the policies, let there be some sign that you're sensitive to the crisis in the land.
Thank you so much, Professor Okey Ikechukwu, Professor Ibrahim, and Professor Adeniyi for joining us tonight on Prime Time. Well, that's it for this edition of Arise Prime Time. Do join us again tomorrow from me and the entire team here in Abuja. It's goodbye, and thank you for watching.